I'm Kay Bess, and this is The Beehive. Women in voiceover, the voices of the fairer sex that keep the wheels of commerce and creativity moving in this country. Voices you hear every day, but names you likely don't know until now. My guest today in the Beehive is the female voiceover artist with perhaps the most beautiful and mellifluous name ever, Rena-Marie Villano. She is known in the biz for her radio imaging work, voicing several stations around the country, including Alt 98.7 here in Los Angeles. Just this past December, Rena-Marie was the live announcer for the 2016 Game Awards at the Microsoft Theater in downtown Los Angeles, and she's done a great deal of promo work for DIY Network and HGTV. One of her favorite projects of late was the 6-episode series on Reels she narrated late last year called Hollywood 911. Rena-Marie Villano, welcome to the Hive.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
Tell me how you first got started in voiceover.
My foray into voiceover started by way of radio. When I was 16, living in West Dover, Vermont, my mother was managing a store called the Natural Apothecary in Brattleboro, Vermont. And so she went into the local radio station to record a commercial for the Natural Apothecary. And she got to speaking with them, and they opened up, as people do with my mom, and they said, they were talking about their, desires, and they wanted an intern. And my mom said, oh, well, my daughter wants to work in television broadcasting, but maybe she'd be interested in being an intern for you. And so she came home and she said, would you be interested in doing this? And I said, well, I want to be in television, not radio. So I said, well, maybe I'll give it a shot. I went down. It was a new age jazz format, similar to what the Wave used to be here in Los Angeles. And I became an intern for them, and I loved it so much.
What kind of things did you do as an intern?
I was calling in record playlists, calling in and, telling them what our hot rotations were for the week and what songs we had on, low rotation, medium, and so on and so forth. I mean, granted, this was February 1990. So I just had my 27-year anniversary of that.
Wow.
So I interned for a month or two, and they said, would you like to be a broadcaster? And I said, yes. But I wasn't old enough because you had to be 17 to apply for an FCC license. So as soon as I turned 17, filled out my application with the Federal Communications Commission, and I became a licensed broadcaster. So I started doing weekends and overnights and, being a live DJ on this 3,000 watt FM station in Mount Snow, Vermont. And then
at 17.
17. I was still in high school, and I caught just mad flack from the small school that I went to because this wasn't the music that my friends listened to. I was the youngest person by far, but I loved radio and I loved announcing and being, live, engaging with callers. And then I was graduating and I was all set to go to, college. I had chosen my schools, and I was going to, be on my way to Elizabethtown College down in Elizabethtown, Pennsylvania, in Amish country. They had this fabulous communications program, and I was going to minor in Spanish and be a mass communication major. And my mom and my stepfather said, we've got work out west. We're leaving. We're moving to Montana. And I said, have a great time. And my mom said, would you be maybe interested in perhaps coming along? And I said, I don't think so. I think I'm good. And she said, well, they have radio stations in Bozeman, Montana. They have 50,000 watt stations, and there's quite a few of them. Mm-hmm. And I made a few phone calls and started researching and doing, what you do. And I found this classic rock station in Bozeman, Montana called KMMS, The Moose. And they were interested in hiring me. So I drove out there with my family and got a job at KMMS. And the first thing I did for them was
on air? Or
no, not on air.
Yet?
Not initially. For the first few weeks, They didn't have any positions open, and I did whatever I could to just, help out. I was the mascot at one point. I put on the moose head and walked around town. But then fairly quickly they did put me on the air, and I started filling in and doing the weekends. It was a classic rock format. And I started working with production, splicing tape, doing commercials. And the program director of that radio station, his name is Dave Cowan. He set me on this task of doing an entertainment segment called Moose About Town. I would call around to all the different venues in Bozeman, and I would say, what do you got? What do you got this weekend? Live acts, music, what do you got? Plays, performances, And I would splice it all together, and I would produce this segment. I used Stevie Ray Vaughan's The Sky is Crying as my music bed. And I was putting together this production and making this, this little segment every week. And then, I started doing commercials for clients. They would call and request, we want Rena-Marie and blah, blah, blah. And I just fell in love with it. I fell in love with audio and with voiceover. And I never ended up going to college because I couldn't defer anymore after 2 years had gone by. I stayed and worked in radio. And, I had a real love of the outdoors. So I had some offers to work in bigger markets. I didn't really want to sacrifice living in a really beautiful place to move to a bigger market. So I turned those offers down and just kind of stayed in the Rockies and lived in Jackson Hole, did radio there and voiceover, a lot of, small market stuff. And it was in Jackson in 1996 or 1997 when I was approached by a production company. And they asked me if I would narrate a ski documentary that they were producing for Outdoor Life Network. And I said, sure, I'd be honored, And I did the narration in the radio production studio, and I sent them the audio that they needed. And they compensated me with a pair of Smith sunglasses. And that documentary was swiftly purchased by Outdoor Life and proceeded to run numerous times on that network. And I,
and there you are with your sunglasses.
I am with my Smith sunglasses.
Yeah.
And then they asked me to do a second documentary. And the second one that I did, I think I got like $100 or something. And in that moment, I really fell in love with narration. Sitting down and just being able to tell a story was so moving to me that I decided I'm going to do this. I actually left Jackson Hole. I went to Seattle, and then I wanted to build my own studio. And I thought, we're transitioning out of this era of analog and into the era of digital. And if I'm really going to learn how to do this, I kind of want to be on the industry level. So I started looking around for radio jobs. And then I chose Boise, Idaho. I took a job in Boise working for Journal Broadcast Group. And my intention was to build a voiceover business from there and ultimately move to Los Angeles or New York or whatever. I was going to learn everything I needed to learn about digital production. That was my intention. I was going to do the simple evening drive on, the river, the AAA station there. I got there, and 7 days later, the Twin Towers came down. And so all of a sudden, this 6-station cluster was scrambling, and they needed someone that could do news. So for the next few years, all through the beginning of the Iraq War and this and the other, I was doing hourly news updates on all of our radio stations in that Journal Broadcast Group cluster. And I was doing, a radio shift, and I was building a voiceover business at the same time. I built a very small studio for myself.
So at what point in there, because it was so radio centric, at what point did you sort of see the very different world of commercial voiceover?
It was probably 2002 or 2003 when I started looking around for a regional agent. And really, I would have done it sooner, but I just didn't have time because I was working full time at the radio station. So I started searching around and looking for the voiceover world outside of Boise. And I started going to workshops, and, I would travel to Portland and do a workshop, or I would travel, and that's where I started getting that taste of actually connecting with the voiceover community instead of just being in my own little bubble as someone who did voiceover and had a background in it for, several years at that point in time. There just wasn't anybody that I could really connect to in Boise who was doing voiceover on the level that I was intending to do voiceover. I think it was 2006 when I first came to Los Angeles, and I worked with Maurice Tobias and did a workshop with her. And that really opened up my, whoa. I mean, that was just like like an egg being cracked open. I just saw this different side of what voiceover was and started getting more introspective with it. And ultimately I left the radio station. I, parted ways with them and decided to really focus full time on VO. And that was around that time.
You were represented for a time, or you were working with Celia Siegel.
I was.
And that's
in 2006, I believe.
Yeah, and that's how you and I met. We met in New York.
At Promax.
Promax, because we were both clients
10 years ago.
Of
Celia.
Yeah. It seems like yesterday, but it was a long time ago.
And who turned me on to her was Steve Stone.
Oh, okay.
So Steve had done some work with her as well. And he said, maybe she can just kind of help you, figure out what you want your brand to be and start to, put some exposure on you. And
Celia Siegel is a marketing and brand expert.
Absolutely. But it was Celia that connected me to my first representation in Los Angeles. She was the one that connected me to SBV.
What's your day like when you have sessions, when you have auditions that you have to get done? And
I have a whole bunch of radio stations that I voice. In fact, I just found this out, so I'll share it with you. Mm-hmm. I found out that I have been chosen as one of the Benztown 50, which is it's an honor. It has to do with like the 50 most successful voice imaging people or whatever in the country. So I guess I'm one of them. I've just learned. And so thanks to Benztown for that honor. So, I have a bunch of different stations, and essentially a copy comes in, and the way that I've always addressed it is first come, first serve, just to try to keep things fair and even. I just kind of wait to see what comes in for the day. And if I get, an audition for a video game, and then I'll get in the booth and give it my best shot and then send it back. And then, if I get copy from Mad Dog Sports Radio, get back in the booth and I just kind of knock them out. I do have clients on both coasts, obviously, and so I try to turn things around within a particular window. I try to, get things back within 3 hours if possible.
We all have our little studio idiosyncrasies. I know for myself, if I am walking into a session, I have to have a few things in my possession, like I need my lip balm.
Yes. We both reached for the lip balm right before we started.
Yeah. And I'm just curious if there's any sort of ritualistic thing you do before you hop in the booth.
My standby is Pangea Organics lip balm.
I have it's like a tub full.
I saw that. I saw that in the bathroom, actually. When I went into your bathroom, I saw that.
And that's depleted. I have, like 10 other in my side drawer by my bed, and I have some in the desk here in the studio. But it's funny, there's so many different lip balms. It's just silly, but
so many out there.
But I find that I really, really love lip smackers, which is like the cheapest, most ridiculous. It's like a little kid. Yeah, lip balm, but I love them. Anyway, you just did the 2016 Game Awards, and so that's live announce, which is a whole beast unto itself. Was that the first time that you had done a live announce?
That was the first time that I had done a live announce on that scale. And let me just say how much I absolutely love that. I love that genre. You and I talked about this genre 10 years ago when you were doing the Critics' Choice Awards, and I loved being able to listen to you, and I've wanted that for a long time, and I've had a lot of very close calls, but I just hadn't been able to break through. And of course, with this particular audition, I did 2 takes and sent it back. I thought I didn't even think twice about it. It was like, here you go. I was so not connected, and then that's the one, of course, that I booked.
Yeah, isn't that crazy?
And I loved it. And I loved it just as much as I knew that I would. I mean, that is definitely my jam. I felt very comfortable. I felt very invigorated by the fact that it was live.
Yeah.
And that takes me back to doing live radio.
Exactly.
I love broadcasting, and I can't tell you how my heart broke when we started to transition in that industry over to automation. It just wasn't the same thing for me. I love live radio. I love it. And I love live announce. I had one little mess up, and I don't know if anybody heard it, but you're sitting there, you're on the talkback box, and you're listening to the comms in your headphones. You're listening to everything that's going on. And you're just listening for them to talk to you directly. Yeah. You're like, ready. I got my finger on the button. I'm ready to go. And there was one particular instance where I I was ready to begin. I knew they were going to come to me, and it was just a matter of time. And I went, and they were like, go. And then I was like, blah, 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 blah. But just that, that was my one little flub. And I went back and I listened, I listened on YouTube, and I was like, oh, I heard it. But I don't know if anybody else did. It was so quick. And I was like, I'll take it. If that's it,
yeah. Well, it's funny because during the Critics' Choice Awards, which I did, and I don't know, it was the 15th annual, which I don't know how long ago that was, but it was a while ago.
It was a couple of years ago.
You have this big script, and I'm making my way through the script, and I'm so thrilled, that I look and I see I only have 3 little graphs before I'm done.
Yes.
And up to that point, I was flawless.
Yes.
And the third to last thing, I tripped over the word the. It was one of those, like, the words just didn't come out.
They just
didn't come out. It's like this shocking, weird thing where you go, just repeat yourself. Just start over.
Yes.
And I remember thinking to myself, God, I had only 3 little lines to go and it would have been perfect. And then I decided, I made this decision that I would never speak of it again. And here I am.
And you're finally broken your silence.
But it was that thing of like, if I don't acknowledge the mistake, then it never happened.
Yeah.
And I figured that anybody who was listening for me made the assessment early in the program and that I was probably, scot-free.
Maybe they had tuned out by then.
By then it was like, yeah, she did all right. It's okay. Yeah. But I was so mad at myself, but there's nothing you can do.
There's nothing you can do. And also, when I'm in that moment where it is live, I kind of leave my body.
Oh, yeah.
And so you're just going through and you're like, your subconscious, second mind is kind of cooking away in the background, and you're like, feel like I said everything right there, but I'm not sure. And then you go back and you go back and you listen. Once it's once I was done, I was on YouTube so fast, and as soon as I could, and I'm listening, and I was like, all right, I did all right, I did good, all right,
well,
okay.
I remember just being done with the show, and I walked out of the the phone closet.
They put you in such such digs, like
fabulous accommodations.
Yes,
truly.
I had 3 layers on. I was up against a brick wall.
I had tech people coming in to the room to like get some tape out of the closet, and I'd be like, I'd put up my hand like just 1 second, and then I would do a thing, and I go, okay, come in. It was so silly, but I walked out at the end of the show just to get a little fresh air, and I walked outside and I stood, and my knees buckled, and I realized that I was carrying so much tension just to get, and it's a 3-hour long broadcast, so you're like, I gotta get through, and you don't realize how much tension you're carrying in your body until you're done and you kind of shake it off. It's crazy. What's the best voiceover experience that you've had? Would you say it's that, or is it something else?
Oh boy, that's a tough question. That was pretty fantastic. I really love all of the radio imaging stuff I do. That means a lot to me. The live announce was huge because I just absolutely loved it. And I really love narration too. I mean, doing the Hollywood 911, just a 6-episode series. I love that. I love being able to get into the storyline. And live announce has those elements in it, where you're describing, and here's this and here's that, and it's hard for me to choose.
It's a toss-up for you.
Yeah, I love promo too. I've done a lot of stuff for DIY, and I love the quickness of that. I love promo in that respect because it's so quick and it's so energized. It's such a different rhythm.
Have you ever had a horrifying experience doing a voiceover job? Like one where you're like, wow, what just happened there?
Yeah, actually I have. When I was moving to Los Angeles, I was exhausted, and I had landed this TV infomercial type gig, right? And it was one of my first jobs with SBV. Not the first, but one of the first, right? And I got here, I just barely, it wasn't even unpacked. And I had this session the next morning. And for whatever reason, my voice was not performing the way I needed it to. And they wanted a particular read from me that was really, really hard for me to locate. Couldn't force my voice to do what this particular thing was that they wanted. And I was very tired, and so I was having trouble. I had literally just driven, 15 or 16 hours or whatever. And it was rough. I got through it. But in that moment when you're expecting you're used to being able to deliver a particular thing, and I just couldn't get it quite right. It took a lot of effort for me to give them what they wanted, and normally it's not that hard for me.
Right.
That shook me to my core for a couple of days. I was really afraid, like, is this a bad sign? I mean, what's happening? Why? But I got through it. It hasn't happened since, but that was hard. That was frightening, kind of.
If your voice isn't doing what you ask of it to do, that it generally can.
It generally can, and I kind of felt like, did I let these clients down? I mean, they seemed happy, but I felt like we kind of feel like we're here. We're trying to give them what they want, and if then we have a tendency to be very hard on ourselves, and then eventually I just had to let it go.
I remember recording something. It was actually for a director's cut. It wasn't a commercial that ever went to air. It was just the director had wanted something different than what the advertising agency ultimately ended up with and put on the air.
Yeah.
So he brought me in to do this. It was for Chevy. I don't know. It was a car, and I don't remember what it was, but I remember having this feeling of, why can't I get my voice to go lower? Like I had hit this floor that was not my customary floor, and I couldn't. Was it not? I wasn't supporting it, or what happened? It was a very odd feeling. And to this day, if I listen to that spot, and I have used it on my demo on occasion, but I listen to it and I'm constantly reminded, like, that right there is not the sound I wanted. That's not the sound I was after, and I couldn't get there.
In that particular session that I was doing, the script was written in such a way that the sentences were very long and run on. As I sit here wheezing, I've always had asthma. And so, I have a particular way in which I work with my lungs. I have an arrangement with them that this is my profession. So
and they need to show up.
But in that moment, these sentences were very long and very run on, and I couldn't get enough air in to be able to get these exceptionally long run-on sentences out. And the directors were just kind of wanting me to read them in a particular way. And I think, if I remember correctly, that was the issue, is I just couldn't do it. I would get like 3/4 of the way through it and I would run out of air because they were so, there's a part of me that's like, these are so freaking flippin' poorly written. Come on, you guys. Yeah. There is a way to do this. But I just had to get through it.
What's your dream voiceover job?
I used to say in the very beginning of all of this that I wanted to narrate a show ongoing for Discovery Channel. Back before Discovery Channel when it was just Discovery Channel, right? There was just one, right? Yeah. I think that's probably what I really would love to do, is just to have an ongoing gig where I'm attached, I'm into this particular storyline, and I'm narrating it, and it's mine, and it's, and I can really connect. I just love that.
And that you're actually identified with the project.
Right. I would love that.
You're giving it a particular print.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you had to name one person who really gave you a leg up in your career, who might that be?
Steve Stone. Without even a hint of hesitation, it's Steve Stone.
Steve Stone is a voice actor.
Steve Stone is a fabulous voice actor who is a very prominent radio imaging, TV affiliate, promo voice. Yeah. And there's a man by the name of Stephen Kaleo. He was imaging a radio station in Portland, needed a female voice that he could play around with, so he had me read some liners for him. That was my first step into radio imaging. And Stephen used my voice to get himself, a particular job at this radio station. And then the program director of the one of the sister stations in the Journal Broadcast Group got a job in Chicago. He went there. He knew me. He was a fan of my voice. When it happened that Q101, which was an alternative station in Chicago, was able to bring on a female voice, he threw my hat into the ring, and ultimately they hired me. Steve Stone was the male voice, so he and I were imaging, we were voicing Q101 together. He would give me guidance, and it was so incredibly helpful that I just absolutely, he, without a doubt, he's the guy.
What's the most important lesson that a career in voiceover has taught you?
It's really important to be malleable. You really have to get outside your head. Get outside your ego. It's not about you or the sound of your voice. It's really about the message that you're delivering. One of the hardest lessons that I had to learn early on was that we do this self-monitoring thing, where you're listening and you're judging yourself while you're doing your reads, and that flubs up your reads.
Yes.
Obviously, because you're taking yourself out of the situation on some level. I finally learned how to not do that, and so I think that's kind of an important esoteric lesson to carry through life. Really, it's not about you necessarily or how you sound. It's more about the message you're delivering. If the job is in your lap, then you're probably the right one for it, and just give them what they're looking for. Give them whatever's going to be. Maurice Tobias said, catch the frisbee. Catch the frisbee. That particular lesson was really hit home for me as well. If a station needs a particular alternative read, give them what they're looking for. Get into that mindset and deliver it. Bring the passion. Make it happen.
I think it holds true in acting. It's the same lesson. You need to be present in the moment.
Present, yeah.
And if you're sitting outside yourself judging your work as it's happening, you're not really present.
Right.
And then you're not really connected. You're not connected to the copy. You're not connected to the other actor. It's a universal truth, I think, in any artistic expression.
Yeah.
You have to be in the moment. Being malleable, that's true too. And that is also a key ingredient to being in the moment, because it actually means you have to respond to what is being asked of you. And if you're rigid, then you can't. You can only say, well, I only know how to do it this way.
Excuse me. And yes, I still have resistance to certain things. I did a session last week for a client, and he said, the client has come back and they've asked for you to sound younger and sexed it up a little, and I always have a little bit of a, there's just like this wall that kind of, it comes up, and I'm like, oh, I hate that direction. But I did what he was looking for. I took myself out of the equation.
Right.
I did what I had to do with my voice, and he was like, that's perfect. And then when I went back and I listened to it, that's not so bad. It's not, I wasn't exploiting myself like I felt like I was in the moment.
Right.
It really did. It was the best take. It was exactly what he wanted. And I'm like, see, so when you get your brain out of the way and your judgments, and try to catch the frisbee, really
is a great phrase.
Yeah, really incredible things can happen. It doesn't always work. I've had some direction where I just can't quite make it happen. I've had a particular agent who I love, but he just wanted me to try to sound extremely kind of young, and it's hard for me. There are limits. There are limits, and all you can do is the best and be like, I love you, and if this is not what you're looking for, I'll catch you on the next round.
Yeah. What do you do to stay motivated? I mean, work always ebbs and flows, right?
Yes.
So what kinds of things do you do in downtime, if you will? And by that, I mean when things aren't booking necessarily, there's always a little slump here and there.
I take those opportunities to go back and look at work I've done. If I have any new work that I maybe haven't received a copy of, or that might now be living online, I'll go and try to find it, and I'll work on putting together a demo if I don't have one currently. Sometimes I will do a workshop or something along those lines, just to kind of get my stoke my fire, if you will, and get my creative juices going. And I find it really helps to interact with your fellow voiceover people.
Very much so. I do. I love that about voiceover, that even when you've been in it for a really long time, I don't know, there's just not a big sense of pride about like, well, I've done this long enough to where I don't really need to go to a workshop. I mean, I think people are just so receptive to the fact that you want to keep working, you got to keep honing. And there's no age limit to learning something new or reading from a different perspective. And I love that there's kind of an acceptance of that. I think it's important.
I think so too. It really is. I probably should be doing more workout stuff right now. Yeah. I haven't had time because I have another business that I'm involved in that is keeping me extremely busy right now, and it conflicts with the one night that the voiceover group that you and I were both involved in. But I haven't been able to get back there.
I went to a promo workshop.
I need to do one of those
with Marilyn Wisner. Harry Dunn was the guest director, and I think he was producing promos at the WB. I think if I get that wrong, it's really sad and pathetic reflection on my ability to get details straight. Anyway, so we were going around the room, and he was asking us, tell me your name and tell me your experience. So everybody goes around the room, and it came to me, and I said my name, and I said, and done promos for CBS and
Yeah.
NBC and CNN and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And he said to me, "Why are you here?" And I was so embarrassed. Like, I think, is he trying to, like, compliment me?
Yes.
Or is he, like, and I don't know just how I managed to pull this response out of my hat, but I said, "Because I've never worked for you before."
That's right. That's right.
It was like there's an expectation in the room that I shouldn't have to be here because I've
you've
worked in
done.
promos, right? And it's like, well, just because you've worked in promos doesn't mean you continue to work in promos unless you bust your ass.
That's right.
Because producers at every network change all the time.
And your favorite producer that used to hire you weekly is now gone.
Gone.
And,
never to be heard from again.
That's right. One of the more recent promos that I did that I really enjoyed was I did a promo for EPIX for Berlin Station, that new show Berlin Station, which is a spy thriller, right? Ooh. And the direction was they don't want this voice to sound like a promo voice, right? and we always love that.
I know, right?
Right, and we're always like, what the hell does this mean? But it's written like a promo. But in this particular job, I was the voice on the phone. And I was a CIA agent speaking to another CIA agent. So I got to just be myself in my voice and say, there's a leak in the CIA, blah, 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 blah. And that was really wonderful because I didn't have to go into my promo. I didn't have to do it. I could just be me being a CIA agent, and it was
acting going on.
Yeah, a little bit of acting, a little bit of, and it was fun. And that kind of stuff I enjoy. Like, this is what you want. Okay, I'm going to give it to you. This is what I think this sounds like, And then when you get the job, it's like, yes, all right. Yeah.
Well, we are coming to the end.
Yes. Okay.
And I want to ask you some questions here. What is your favorite word?
Oh my goodness. That's tough. I don't know how to answer that.
I'll sit here as long as it takes.
Oh my gosh. How do people answer that question?
It depends. Sometimes it's the word that evokes the feeling that they might say, my favorite word is love, or they might say my favorite word is moist, because they like the word itself as opposed to what the word conjures up for them. Actually, no one has said that they like the word moist. That's always been the word that they hate.
It's such an uncomfortable word.
Such a horrid word. How about your favorite word of the day? How's that? Does that make it easier?
Maybe. I think my favorite word of the day is connection, because I think it's really important to be connected to yourself, to a script, to the world around you, to your partner, to your clients, to your friends. I mean, connection is such an important concept. So that'll be my favorite word. Okay.
What's your least favorite word?
Moist. Probably moist. Yes. Moist.
What turns you on?
Oh, wow. Intellect.
What turns you off?
Bravado or chest thumping, or I don't like that. And that can be, women can do that as machismo. I suppose you could use that word, but.
What sound or noise do you love?
Probably the sound of a breeze. Probably just a soft breeze.
What sound or noise do you hate?
The sound of a leaf blower right outside my studio.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Attorney, probably. I've always had a thing for law.
What profession would you not like to attempt?
Being a doctor or surgeon, because I don't think I would do good with
inside of bodies and things.
No.
If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Welcome.
Rena-Marie Villano.
Yes.
A beautiful name. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
Tell everyone where they can find you. Search you out on the interwebs.
You can find me on my website, which is RenaMarieVillano.com, RenaMarieVillano. SoundCloud / I think it's RM Villano. They can find me on my Facebook artist page, which I think it's facebook.com/Rena-Marie Villano VO.
If they search Rena-Marie Villano VO, they can find you there.
Yeah. Okay. And then, in various places, you'll hear me. If you live in Boston, you'll hear me on WAAF. If you listen to Sirius, it's Mad Dog Sports Radio. Here in LA, Alt 98.7. Seattle, 95.7 The Jet. So on and so forth. All that stuff is on my website. Thank you so much.
Thank you
K-Bess.
for being here. Mwah.
Mwah. Thank you.
Thanks for joining me today in the Beehive. For podcast notes, pictures, and more information on my guests, visit the podcast website, thebeehivepodcast.com. Find me at my website, kbess.com. Follow me on Twitter at kbess, and subscribe to my channel on YouTube. If you've a mind to, please post a review of the podcast on iTunes. Kind words are like honey, sweet to the soul and good for the bones. Come back for more Women in Voiceover next time in the Beehive.